Well, good afternoon. I'm Gordon Macdonald. I work for the Care Not Killing Alliance, which is a coalition, a UK-based coalition of organisations, faith-based and non-faith-based disability groups, which campaigns against the legalisation of euthanasia. And I'm also here representing the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, which is based in Canada and is also involved in networking internationally to resist attempts to legalise euthanasia and assisted suicide. Now, the first point I want to make is about the motivation of those who want to legalise euthanasia and assisted suicide. In 1859, John Stuart Mill wrote, "The only part of the conduct of anyone for which he is amenable to society is that which concerns others. In the part which merely concerns himself, his independence is of right absolute. Over himself, over his own body and mind, the individual is sovereign." And this is the root of the utilitarian ideology which dominates modern Western society. But I want to suggest to you today that even for utilitarians, euthanasia should be a bridge too far because of the harmful effects it has on other people. So at its root, we find an emphasis on autonomy. This is the ideological emphasis which underpins drives for euthanasia and assisted suicide. It's a desire for control over death, to control the circumstances of death. And associated with that is a fear of loss of dignity, and a desire to avoid suffering, and a desire not to be a burden either to family or health services. A definition of euthanasia is important to understand. Euthanasia is an act or an omission of an act which has the intent to end life prematurely. And the intention is the key aspect of this definition. Euthanasia is not withholding or withdrawing treatment from people who are dying anyway, if that treatment is futile. It is not the proper use of large doses of painkillers. Euthanasia by omission is the intent to kill, to withdraw treatment. And this is different from accepting the limits of treatment. This is important to understand because much of the confusion which is perpetrated by our opponents is designed to lead to legalization of euthanasia and assisted suicide on a false premise that it already happens. Assisted suicide is not aid in dying. Assisted suicide is when one person directly and intentionally is involved in ending the life of another person. There are a number of consequences where euthanasia is legalized, and these are negative consequences, and this is why euthanasia does not just affect the individual concerned. The first one is that we have seen an increase, or an incidence, I should say, of euthanasia in cases where there has been no explicit consent or request. The most recent report in the Netherlands showed that in 550 cases there had been no explicit request or consent. In Belgium, there were 32% of cases, one report showed, where this was the case as well. Another report in Belgium suggested that in 45% of cases there was no explicit request or consent obtained prior to euthanasia. Secondly, we see euthanasia of people who are depressed. Indeed, depression is a primary risk factor. One report concluded to their surprise that people who were depressed were more likely to access euthanasia or assisted suicide. This perhaps would come as no surprise. In Oregon, in the US state of Oregon, a study showed that 26% of people were either depressed or had feelings of hopelessness. And in 71 cases in Oregon of assisted suicide, in only one of those cases was psychiatric or psychological assessment sought, and indeed that was an increase from 0 in the previous year. The Oregon Death with Dignity Act is portrayed as having no real problems, and yet there is no mechanism for reporting to ensure that the reporting mechanism in Oregon is implemented correctly to ensure that all assisted suicide deaths are reported. So the third point we see is that reporting of deaths is underestimated. In 2009, 57 of 59 reported deaths were conducted by Compassion and Choices, which is the main pro-euthanasia, pro-assisted suicide organization in Oregon. I think I'll jump on to the next point, which is that we see increasing numbers. In the Netherlands, there was a 19% increase in euthanasia deaths in 2010 and a 13% increase in 2009. In Belgium, we saw a 36% increase in euthanasia deaths in 2009. Now in the Netherlands, we have a campaign that has been launched to allow anyone over the age of 70 who is tired of life to access euthanasia. And in Belgium, we have organ donation guidelines associated with euthanasia. So the dangers of abuse, I think, are evident. In Florida, we see that in cases of homicide stroke suicide, spousal homicide and suicide, in many cases there has been a history of abuse. Then we move on to the eugenic issues, particularly in relation to the euthanizing of infants. The Groningen Protocol in the Netherlands allows newborn infants to be euthanized. In this protocol, the concept of suffering is not limited to current suffering, but also possible future suffering. There are 5 criteria which must apply. First of all, there must be a certain diagnosis. There must be hopeless and unbearable suffering. Consent must be given, and the procedure must be carried out according to established medical practice. And 3 groups of infants can qualify for this. The first group are those who have no chance of survival. The second group are those who may survive but have a grim prognosis. And the third group are infants who would normally survive, but it is deemed that it is better for the child and for their family and for society that their life is ended. So when we think about how we win this battle on euthanasia, there are a number of key factors to winning. First of all, it's important that we focus on the likely victims. And if you are facing this issue, you need to identify people who are disabled to be your spokespeople, because people who are disabled carry a stronger voice on this issue. Secondly, we need to focus on elder abuse. And thirdly, to work with people from all points of view, whether Christian, Jewish, Muslim, or atheist. And fourthly, we have to be clear about what we are talking about, clear about definitions. I want to invite you all to come to the first European Symposium on Euthanasia, which will take place in Edinburgh later this year. And if you want to come and see me at the end, and I'll give you a leaflet about that. Thank you very much.